Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff, and I'll be your host for the show. Before we get started, if you've had a Dogman encounter of your own and would like to speak with me, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you. Tonight's guest is Damien. Damien, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Vic.
Thanks for being here.
It's an honor. It's a great show. I enjoy it on a weekly basis, so it's great to be here.
Well, thanks for being here. I'm looking forward to doing this interview with you. Please give us a brief bio on yourself.
Well, I grew up on the East Coast, not too far from the city of Manhattan, or I guess the island of Manhattan, and mostly New Jersey, in New York and New Jersey. Spent a lot of time in upstate New York and western New Jersey. My dad and my grandfather were both fishermen, so we hit many of the lakes from, the Catskills all the way up to northern Hudson area and down to southern New Jersey. Had a great upbringing, loved the city life as well as the outdoors. I'm a big baseball fan, always enjoyed that, and I spent a lot of my youth trying to figure out how I could become Han Solo. I would say Star Wars was probably my favorite thing out of my youth. But there was another movie that sort of changed my life a bit. That was The Omen, which came out in, I believe it was 76 or 77, just a few years after I was born. And it affected me a lot. So a lot of the things that I've learned about paranormal and that, it actually originated from my naming.
I can only imagine, since that movie did come out just a few years after you were born, what kind of effect that would have had on you. Kids being as cruel as they are, that had to be awfully hard.
I got picked on quite a bit. A lot of your dad is Satan, and which I found it funny as I got older. When I was about 4, 5, and 6, I think it was really hard. As I started to become a little bit more self-aware, not that 7 and 8 is an age to be very self-aware, but as I got a little older, I remember an instance where the schoolmate just wouldn't let it go. He kept telling me that Satan was my father, and finally one day I just turned to him and I said, "You know what, you're right, and he's going to come for you tonight." And he just looked at me, sort of like odd and shocked that I would say something like that. And the next day at school, I got called into the office because the boy stayed up all night. I think I mentioned something about, when you fall asleep, my father's going to steal your soul. And so he finally went into his mom and dad's room early in the morning and I guess was crying to them, and they came in. And so I got in trouble for him teasing me because I finally stood up to him. But I always thought it was funny that I got the bully back by telling him that, yes, my father was Satan and he's going to steal your soul tonight. And the kid couldn't go to sleep, and he cried himself into his parents' room. So.
Well, at least he left you alone after that, huh?
He did, for about a year. But then he forgot about my father and decided to come back after me. But it's all right. We live and we learn.
I'd say so. Because of the experiences you had, because of your name like you just mentioned, as a kid, were you fascinated by monsters and things like that went bump in the night, or did that kind of put you off because of that experience you had due to your name?
I think it made me very curious. I grew up, I think a lot of us who grew up in the 70s, we grew up with The Omen. We grew up with, what was Linda Blair's movie?
The Exorcist.
Yeah, The Exorcist. We grew up with Cujo, and, it was at a time when horror movies were, I think it was one of those times when horror movies were really big, and Jaws was a big film. I remember seeing Jaws and not wanting to go swimming for about a year. And yeah, I think it made me curious. I think a lot of my friends were curious at that time because, a lot of these movies, these books, the things we'd read would start with, "This is based on a true story." And part of you wanted to know, is it really based on a true story? Is that really true? Can it happen? Is it real? When your name is Damien, like I was saying, I got teased quite a bit. But I was very curious. I was curious to know, is there any truth to it? Is there a son of Satan? What does that entail? I read the Bible. I read excerpts about the Bible, about Satanism, about, Satan's Bible and all these different things. And it didn't necessarily guide me religiously, but, I was very curious. I did a lot of research. as a young man, and as I got into my teens, I was really into it for a while. I don't know if you'll remember this. There was a writer, her name was Anne Rice. She did a novel series on vampires. I got big into that as a teenager. And so, yeah, I think it really did influence me towards wanting to understand, and when I was younger, wanting to experience something supernatural. Today, I wouldn't want that at all. But back then, I was very curious. I wanted to not just know, not just have knowledge, but I wanted to have experiences. I wanted to actually have something happen.
Speaking of all the research you did, how much research did you do on Dogman after you had that experience?
I didn't do anything at first. I didn't really know how to deal with it. I think I just shut it out. I just pushed it away. I went home and hugged my kid. I was really freaked out. I mean, even now, and I've heard other people who tell their stories, it's amazing when you recap it, you talk about it, it comes back. And there's something about that fear that's different. I was in a really bad car accident as a teenager, and I was afraid for my life. I had a bad injury, and the doctors didn't know how to fix me. And I remember what it was like to be afraid that this could be it for me at the age of 18. I compare that fear to what I felt that day in the woods, and they're just totally different. It's just a very different experience. One was very primal. It was in the gut. It's like when you go up to a girl and you're nervous and you get the butterflies and your stomach sort of swirls around and you can't control it. There's no reasoning with that feeling. You know, when you're afraid, this was like a million times worse than that. There was no talking it down. You know, when I was in the hospital and I was, after the car accident, I could reason with what was happening and sort of talk my way through it and reason that there's a good chance I'll be okay. This other thing, I haven't been to the woods since, so that should tell you right there the impact it had.
It's easy to listen to these encounters on the show and think that you'd handle the encounter one way, but until you go through it, you never will really know how you would respond.
You don't know what you're dealing with. I think we all have had situations in our lives where circumstances were such that we couldn't necessarily control them. But this is different. It's a scary thing. It's a real-life horror movie. Come to the woods near you. I mean, it's not a fun experience. And a kid, that's how I deal with stuff. I try to joke. But I used to go fishing every week. And I haven't been since. I used to go hiking all the time. And I haven't been since. And yet, at the same time, I have not told many people. I have not shared this story. I have not really wanted to talk about it until recently. I pushed it away. I didn't know how to deal with it. I didn't even know where to put it, how to register it. What was it? Was it just me? Except there was nothing in my life that could have, I don't know, usually you'd have something maybe something had happened to you, and then you have another experience, and then you're in a state of fear, and so then maybe you could reason that, okay, there was nothing. I've just been really stressed, but I was at a really good point in my life. I was actually in a very good place. So to have something very negative come into my life at a time when everything was very positive, yeah, it was not a good thing, not a good time.
Well, I'm convinced there is no such thing as a good time in your life to have a Dogman encounter. There really is no good time, in my opinion.
Well, I used to feel really good about the fact that I live in the city until I started listening to your show, Vic. So thank you for taking away the last morsel of safety that I found, because some of the people and some of the research I've done recently that says that people are sighting these creatures inside city limits. That's mind-boggling. That's scary.
As if this whole topic isn't unnerving enough, yeah, the idea that you can be in the city and still have an encounter, that's just too much right there. People do see them going into abandoned buildings in the night, crawling through open windows or whatnot. I can't even imagine what that would be like.
When you hear about the stories where people have been approached by dogmen or been harassed, is probably a better term, around their homes or even in their homes, to me that's the most frightening thing a person can experience is an encounter, a negative encounter in your home, because that's where we go to be safe. That's where we go to relieve our stress and to be with our family and to decompress and feel better about things. So, you hear stories about people being robbed at gunpoint, or I've heard stories of women raped in the home and how difficult it is to get over that. Now, imagine if it's something that you don't recognize as being of this world. How do you process that? What do you do with that? I don't know how you would process that. You've talked to more people than I have, so maybe somebody you've spoken to has had an experience similar to that and was able to tell you how they were able to deal with it.
Well, one of the problems with this whole thing is whenever we've watched movies that had werewolves in them, that preconditions us to fear something that looks that way. So that just makes having an encounter with one of these things that much worse than it would have been already. So that just makes it even harder to get over. Let's get into this experience you had. In 2009, you had an experience in the Ashley National Forest. Please tell us about that.
Is it okay if I first tell you a story that happened earlier in my life?
Please do.
Okay, all right. I'll sort of tie these together and why I'm telling you. So, as a young man, I went to a private school, and one of the privileges of being in that private school was every year we went on a class trip, and that class trip lasted a week. And in one year, we actually went to a farm in upstate New York. Each day, we got up at the crack of, I think it was 4 a.m., crack of dawn. I don't even think it was dawn. I think it was a good 2 hours before dawn. And I don't remember ever smelling anything that bad before in my life, but working on that farm. And we would get up real early, and each day we would go downstairs, we'd eat breakfast, the whole group of us, and then we'd go, and they had a chalkboard where they'd put your name, and then you'd find out, what your chores were for that day, and you would go with your group and head over to whatever part of the farm. And it was really fun. We had a great week. Other than the smell, which I don't think I'll ever forget, it was fun. For leisure time, we would get a few hours in the afternoon, and we would go out and play tag or manhunt or freeze tag. And one day, we were out, and part of goofing off and having fun would be scaring each other and chasing each other. And one of the boys, I'm not going to use his name, I'll just call him Joey, because he didn't want me to use his name in telling his story. So anyway, Joey had gotten sort of ahead of us, and we were just hiking sort of in a circle, and we're going to find our way back. I believe the area where the horses were was where we were going to come back out. And he came running, and we heard him, didn't see him. He was screaming, so we ran to find out what was going on, and at first we just figured someone was probably chasing him and trying to tag him, but I don't know, there's a difference between the scream of fun play and the scream of someone who's afraid. And it sounded more towards, wow, he's really spooked. So we ran after him to try to find out what was going on, and I think a couple of the girls ran towards the farm to find a teacher. We found him. He had actually ran into a tree at full speed. He was so freaked out by something he saw, which he said was a wolf. And, of course, we teased this poor kid. I don't think we ever stopped. I think we relentlessly teased him for years. And he was scared of something so bad, he ran himself into a tree, had a huge lump on his head. He had knocked himself silly. We actually found him wrapped around the tree, sitting on the ground with his legs wrapped around the tree and his arms. He was hugging the tree. I would say this tree was probably a good 8 to 10 inches thick. So it wasn't the biggest tree in the world, but it wasn't the smallest tree either. And we tried to find out what happened. There was a wolf. He was after me. We were kind of laughing at him because, well, there aren't any wolves. We figured probably one of the dogs from the farm was out there running around doing its thing. And we figured, you just got scared. And he's like, no, it was a wolf. We all just dismissed it as Joey being Joey, and that was that. Years later, when I had my experience, I would come to think about Joey's tale and what he went through that day and how he was really spooked. In fact, when I tried to reach out to him before coming on the show to find out what it was that he saw that day. He did not want to talk to me about it. And I don't know if that's because he's still spooked or he just doesn't want to talk about it and doesn't feel that it's worth discussing. But I found it interesting that even now, this many years later, he didn't want to talk about it. You know, a simple running in the woods, hey, remember that time you ran into the tree? And he just shut it down. He just said, nah, we're not going to go there. So I can understand that. So if he saw something similar to what I saw, then I can understand why he shut it down. Maybe he doesn't want to talk about it. You know, and then, Vic, I don't know where you grew up. I grew up in an area that was primarily a Catholic area, and it was an upper middle class sort of place. So, you know, telling ghost stories was something you did as a kid and as a teenager, but it wasn't something you did in society. People would look at you funny, and people have had their reputations hurt for a lot less. And I think a lot more people have experiences like this than ever talk about it. I think when you hear hundreds or maybe even thousands of people a year coming forward and saying, hey, I saw something, whether it's a Bigfoot or a Dogman, I think there's probably 3, 4, 5 times that amount of people who are not coming forward, who refuse to. Whether it's because they don't want to be hassled, whether it's because they don't want their reputation tarnished, or whatever their reasons might be. I think there's a lot of people out there who've probably seen things who just aren't going to come forward and say anything. They're just not going to give us the opportunity to hear their stories. I guess the closest that I've come to going in the woods, my daughter and my son wanted to do a camp out. It's not really the woods. It's in Park City, Utah. I don't know if you're familiar with Park City, but it's sort of a resort town that's situated just above, about 35 minutes outside of Salt Lake. And it's a ski resort area. And not too far from there, they have like the YMCA camp. I guess technically it would be the woods, but it's really close to town. Everything sort of, the trees are bulldozed down. It's a wide open space. You drive in, you drive right up to your lodge, so you don't have to go to tent. You back up, you open your trunk, you're about 15 feet away, you walk your stuff into the cabin, and then you go park your car about 50 feet away. I was nervous doing that. That's the only thing I think I've done near the woods since 2009.
Well, see, that's the thing. When someone has an encounter like you did, it's pretty common for them to second guess if they're responding to it in the right way. Well, there is no right or wrong way to respond and react to an encounter. You just respond in the best way you know how, and that's always going to be the right way. Having said that, let's get into that encounter that you had now. Please give us every last detail that comes to mind.
Just before I get into the story, I thought I'd throw this out because I find it just hilarious. Following up on your statement, the Bigfoot guys making fun of guys who reported Dogmen was probably one of the funniest things that I've come across in the last year. As I've been researching more and more about this, that some of the Bigfoot guys think it's ridiculous that there could be a Dogman out there, which I found to be probably the most ridiculous thing that I've encountered thus far. And the reason why I say that is, one of the reasons why I haven't shared my story is because I'm really afraid of what people think. And I'm okay with that. I'm not a person who generally cares what people think. I'm pretty self-confident. But this is something that it changed me. It was 2009. I had just gotten a position at a new company, and my family and I were prepping to move out of state, and we were staying with family for a month as we got ready, and they lived up in the Park City area. And one of the things that I was so happy about was being up there. I was going to have some time to go fishing because I didn't have any work, and my wife and my daughter were out a lot of the time playing with the neighbor girl and her friend, so they were always off doing whatever, and gave me a lot of time to go out and check out a lot of the lakes that I hadn't had a chance to fish at. I had purchased one of the passes. You can get I don't know if they're regional or national, but you can get those national park passes that allow you to go to all the forests and all the national parks. And I went and bought one of those so I could just basically drive into any national park with my rod and reel and go enjoy myself. I was buying tackle one day, and a local gentleman, I asked him, I said, well, I've hit this area and this area, I've hit this river. I had a lot of fun on the Provo River in Utah. It was a blast. I actually caught my largest trout ever. I think it was 22.5-inch rainbow trout. I was proud of that one. So I was looking for somewhere new, and he suggested that I take, there's a highway, I think it's 150, that leads out of Camas, Utah, and it leads back into the Ashley Forest there. He gave me directions, and I went ahead, and the next day I got up and I went down and I went to check it out. And the first time that I found the lake, it was a small man-made lake. I'd say you could probably walk around this lake in about 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, as you traveled on a pretty rough dirt road that took you from one camping site area to another. In between was this lake, and it was on the east side of the road. As you pulled up to the lake, which was actually on the north end of the lake, you could pull in, and I guess you could actually, they had a sort of a natural boat ramp there. You could back your boat down in if you wanted to, or park your car in that area. There was room for probably about, I'd say, 6 to 8 cars. Or you could just park right on the side of the road. There wasn't obviously much traffic or anything, and the road was wide enough that trucks were coming by once in a while, pulling those four-wheeler carts. So it was a good space. That day, I went ahead and parked in the little parking area. I noticed the gentleman was already out there. He had, I think, 2 little ones with him, and I made my way around the west side. So if you could imagine this lake north to south, it ran long north to south, and east to west it was thin, and north to south it was long. So it was, in a sense, a big oval. I made my way down past the gentleman. We spoke for a few minutes. I asked him how he was doing. He showed me his catch. He had caught several fish, and I'm assuming they stocked this lake, because obviously it wasn't very big, and there's no natural spring, no natural river, and he was using a little spinner bait. So I copied, and I think I was there for about an hour and a half. It was already kind of late in the day. I don't know if you fish, Vic, but usually you want to get there in the morning before sunrise, enjoy that magic time, and then at night it's the same way. But as the sun starts to rise and it starts to get hot, a lot of the fishing isn't as good, unless you're really good, unless you're like those guys on ESPN2 who go out there and catch 10-pound bass with a piece of corn. But anyway, so I copied what he was doing, and I had no luck. And so I decided, I'm going to come back. I'll come back early. I'll go to the store tonight and get some spinners. I didn't really have many. I don't think I had a couple at the time. So I thought I'd get a couple others and try my luck the next day. And I went down there the next day, and I got there fairly early, and no one was there when I got there. It was dark. I parked in the parking area. So on the west side, there were a bunch of rocks, some large boulders, and he was fishing off one of them. I actually went and stole his spot. So I was happy he didn't show up. That would have been maybe rude because he's a local guy, but I went and stole his spot and figured if he could catch 6 or 7 lake trout, I could too. So I started casting, and no luck. And I was getting kind of frustrated. I wanted to win, but I don't get spooked too easily. Well, I used to not get spooked very easily. This area was just sort of, I don't know, it was just in the middle of nowhere. I wasn't very familiar with the area, and it was enough to spook me a little bit. I decided that I was going to go, but I wasn't going to be conquered. I was going to go and get my brother, bring him back. And that's what I did. A couple days later, I convinced my brother, who would probably prefer playing video games to ever doing an activity outside of the house. But I convinced him to go with me. I said, come on, come with me. And he didn't know why. I was like, please, just come with me. And finally, he relented. He agreed to give up 3 or 4 hours of video game play to actually go breathe some natural air. So the non-stale air. We got down there real early, probably about 6:30 in the morning. I think it was a joy just watching him struggle. I bought him a bunch of live bait, so I gave him some worms and some of that cheese bait. Really easy stuff that you give to the kids, and he still struggled with it. It was fun to watch, and very uncoordinated. And he gave up fishing after about 20 minutes, and he was just wandering around. So about 20 minutes went by, and he had made his way down around the southern area of the lake onto the east side of the lake. And I had not gone over there. It looked kind of muddy. I hadn't ventured over there at all. I stayed by the rocks on the west side. And he started calling to me. He said, "Hey, come down here." And I was like, "Okay, what?" He said, "No, come here, come here." He was like really excited about something. So I went down and ran down there. And I got down. And at this point, the sun was up. It was nice day. If I can remember, at this point, just as the sun was rising, you could see it was going to be blue skies. And I got down there, and here were these tracks. And they were huge. I'm not a hunter, so I can't necessarily just look at a track and tell you what it is. But I know enough that I had never seen tracks like these, and I didn't understand because they had claws. And I'm looking at them, and I'm going, well, that is a huge mountain lion, because that's the first thing that came to my head was it's got to be a mountain lion. And these tracks were so big that I could stick my foot in the track, and there was space. I am 5'6". I wear about a 9 shoe, but still, I don't know too many mountain lions that wear a size 9 shoe. So I was like, wow, these are huge. So meanwhile, we noticed that next to them were the tracks of a deer. And I say deer because I've seen the difference between deer and elk. When you're out here, elk are pretty big, and this didn't look too big. So he was either, I guess, a young elk, a female elk, or a deer. We started following them, and then something happened that I had never experienced before, ever. It got quiet. I mean, I laughed, but it was unnerving. I don't know if you've ever experienced anything like this. I think maybe you said you had once or twice. It got weird quiet. The crickets, the gnats, like all the bugs stopped moving. What on earth could get bugs to stop making noise? I can understand birds stop singing, but bugs? I look at my brother, he looks at me, and he looks white. I'm like, what? And he's like, I don't want to be here. Meanwhile, like, I feel it, I sense it, but these tracks are crazy. Like, I've never seen anything like them. My phone was in the car. To be honest, actually, Vic, I don't even know, like, photos weren't even really what came to my head at that moment. You would think, in this day and age, with technology as it is, the first thing that would come to your head, especially with someone like, I have a background in film and TV, that's what would come to your head is, go get your camera, take a picture. I didn't have a very good phone at the time. I had one of those flip phones, so it didn't have a very good camera. But that's, you would think that's what comes to your head. Not really. I was really spooked, and at the same time really fascinated by these huge paw marks with the claws. And I'm trying to figure out the gait of this thing, because it looked weird. It looked funny. Normally, you would see 4 paw prints, and I couldn't make out exactly how this thing walked. I was looking for what I thought it was. It was a mountain lion. It was a really big mountain lion. And I figured the mountain lion was nearby because everything got super quiet, and we were spooked, and we were kind of unnerved. And then the oddest thing happened. Talk about breaking the ice. I guess in a sense, God broke the ice that day. Out of nowhere, it started to thunder, and it got dark, and this monsoon came in, and it just ripped through, and I would say no more than 5 minutes. I mean, it just poured, and my brother just ran. He dropped his pole. He dropped everything. He went right up to the car. I was sort of left down there in between wanting to run for my life and not get eaten by the gigantic mountain lion, and or go and look at these paw prints, because they followed the deer, and then as the deer turned into the woods, so did the prints. And if I could better explain it so you could understand how big and deep these prints went, the deer and this animal had walked right on the edge of the water and the land, so it was all mud. And so the prints were that much bigger because they had pushed into the mud. I'd seen a bear print, I think, once or twice, and these were bigger than those, were about the same size. They were huge. They were gigantic. And the claws, that was the thing I was trying to remember in my head. When do mountain lions take out their claws? Do they walk with their claws out? Do they take them out when they attack? I was trying to figure that out. But as you follow the prints, the claws were out for too long. I think if it had been an animal with retractable claws, I don't think there would have been claws the whole time, because it went on for a good 30, 40, 50 feet, where it just kept going on and the claws were there the whole time. I was sort of stuck. In one way, I was really happy that the monsoon had sort of blown through. It took me out of that trance. My brother's up in the car now. I've got all my gear all over. He'd been sort of playing with stuff and left it all sitting around, so I started gathering stuff up. And then it happened, or maybe it never stopped happening, but I noticed it again. It was just really eerie. It was quiet. It was so quiet. I mean, it just rained, and the only thing I could hear was some drip, drop of water. And again, it's a weird feeling. Like, it's one thing to have animals stop making noise, but bugs? You've been in the forest. There's a sound to the forest. It's amazing how loud the forest is. If you're really a techie nerd, like some of us are, you can actually measure the sound of the forest, and it's loud. People don't realize how loud the forest is. So when it goes quiet, it is noticeable. It is severe. And I so wanted to follow the tracks. I wanted to see where they went. But I was so freaked out. And my brother was up in the car. He had left me there. And he had even gone as far as he took the keys, he turned the car on, he was sitting in there. I'm gathering up the gear, and suddenly I start to feel like I need to hurry. I suddenly had this feeling like, come on, get out of here. It's time to go. It's time to go, and we're not going to come back. I'm furiously trying to gather everything up, and that day, we had not parked down at the northern end like I had done when I had come alone. We had parked on the road. And so the way back to the car was actually up a small hill that went through some trees, and it wasn't very thick, so you could see the car from the lake. The lake was only maybe, a stone's throw from the road. You're talking, 50 feet, so not very far, maybe 100 feet from the road down the hill to the lake. I remember grabbing a bunch of stuff, and I started to run like a little kid. And I remember that feeling like when you're spooked and you're a little kid. I remember as a kid talk about werewolves and werewolf movies. I saw American Werewolf in London. That movie freaked me out. I'll never forget it. The friend coming to him in the hospital with the little Mickey Mouse doll. David! And he's all ripped up and torn to shreds, and he's telling him that you're going to become a monster and eat people. And I remember that was a big deal in movies, and I'm a huge movie buff and love film. And at that time, the special effects, it was a really big deal, the special effects that went into American Werewolf in London, because they actually showed the transformation of David turning into the werewolf. So when I think of werewolves, in a sense, that's kind of one of the things that I look back to. I think I saw The Howling once or twice. If you were to ask me to draw one or to think of one, that's probably where I would go with it. Although now I'd probably go with yours. You have those big black Dogmen on your videos. Those are kind of unnerving. I'm struggling up the hill. I'm fumbling. I'm falling all over myself. At some point, I'm a logical person. I grew up, even though I was really into supernatural things, even though I really wanted stuff to happen, nothing ever really happened. I had a couple of experiences in my life that were different, and I can't necessarily explain what happened, but for the most part, I'm a pretty straightforward, logical person who listens to reason and believes in facts and science. And when something like this happens, sometimes, I don't know, maybe because of that, it's hard for me to process it. And so I started laughing because I felt like a little kid who was really spooked after seeing Jaws or one of these horror movies or American Werewolf in London. Of course, at this moment, the last thing in my mind, I'm thinking, not even Bigfoot is in my mind. I'm thinking there's a really big cat out there, and I probably was looking up in the trees. I can't remember that detail, but I've heard that they jump on you. So I probably was looking up in the trees, and I'm fumbling, and I finally got to the car, and I got the first couple of rods in and some of the equipment, and I realized that I had left one of my rods down by the rocks. It was mine and my tackle box. I realized I had to go back down there to get it. And I apologize, Vic. Sometimes it's hard to remember all the details exactly the way it happened. At this point, because I can't remember exactly what I left down there. I know one of them was a pole and something else, and I ran down to get it, and I grabbed it. And I remember because it was more than just a pole, because I had to sort of grab more than one thing. I was sort of grabbing it, and I was fumbling again, trying to get up the hill, and I had like a moment, a feeling, and I turned around, and across on the east side of this lake, I saw something, and I couldn't make out what it was. I stared, and it was like a shadow. But it was the biggest shadow I've ever seen outside of a zoo in my life. And it noticed me, the best that I don't even know how to explain this. It stepped, whatever it was, it stepped back into the woods, into the darkness. And I lost it. I mean, I just threw everything in the car. I don't even, usually when you have hooks and on your line, you take care with how you put things away. And that did not happen that day. I was dumbfounded as to what I had just experienced, what I had seen. I had no idea what I had seen. It didn't make any sense to me. It was very big. It was very tall. It had a huge head. I couldn't make it out real well. It was like an outline. It was a shadow. It was something there. It moved. It wasn't a tree. It wasn't the leaves. I know the difference between, it was a body, I could tell, and it stepped backwards out of where I could see it, as if it knew by stepping back to where it went that I would no longer be able to really make out what it was. And I thought to myself, is it a bear? But bears don't stand like that. They don't step like that. I've never seen a bear gracefully step backwards. I have never known or heard of a bear that was smart enough to know if it stepped backwards that it would be in a darker area, or even to know that I had noticed it in that way. This thing knew I had stopped, I had scanned, and I had stopped right on it with my eyes. It knew it, I knew it, and it scared the living bleepity-bleep out of me. I got in the car, I drove way too fast out of there. I had a sedan, a small sedan, and it was not the road you want to be driving like that, but I didn't care, and I got out of there. My brother wouldn't talk about it. On the way home, I had said to him, did you see anything when you were down there? Did you see anything? I remember at one point he looked like ashen, and he ran for his life. And this is a guy who, if you'd see him, at this point in his life, he was a jelly donut, my friend. He was a tubby, flubby guy, and he zipped up out of that area. I'd never seen him move that fast, and I didn't even know he could. And on the way home, I said, did you see anything? And he wouldn't talk to me. In fact, has never spoken to me about it. So I don't know if he saw something. I don't know if he just felt presence. I don't count him as one of the people that I told because he was there. And I remember, it's amazing how hindsight is 20/20. I don't know if it would have been a good idea to run down there with my phone. I don't know. The phone, I thought about it since we first spoke, trying to remember exactly why did I leave the phone in the car. It wasn't a very good phone. Could I have even taken photos with it? Why didn't I go get it? But that's not what goes through your head when the forest stops speaking. It's fear. It's primal fear. It's like nothing else. Nothing compares to it. I've seen some scary movies since then. Nothing compares to it. I've had some scary moments in my life. This was something deep inside that just, it's there. I've heard some people talk about how they think, maybe this is something that is inside us from eons ago when we used to get chased by things that wanted to eat us. The interesting thing, though, Vic, is that I didn't think about it very much for years. I shut the whole thing out, but I also shut out fishing, and I moved across the country. It wasn't like I stayed there. I moved 2,500 miles away, and I still couldn't go into the woods. Forget going alone. When my daughter would say, "You want to go hiking?" I always had an excuse. Boy, no. Daddy's foot hurts today. No, my back hurts. I had a lot of excuses. Had a lot of headaches. But it changed me. I wouldn't necessarily say for the better. I wouldn't necessarily say for the worse. It just changed me on a primal level. I listen to people who, on your show and other shows, who say they've seen things and then they want to run back out there and go and shake hands with it and take photos. I didn't even have half the experience some of these people have had, and I'm telling you, I can't do it. I can't bring myself. Like I told you, we went to that YMCA camp, which is right next to town, and I would not let my kids out of my sight. I practically held hands with them the whole weekend. And my daughter goes up there every summer. She goes up for girls' camp. I don't know if you know much about girls' camp, but the girls have a fun week, and then you come up at the end of the week and they get little medals that, what they were good at, responsibility or trustworthiness or honesty, and they have a big ceremony, and that's too much of the woods for me right there. Yeah, my girlfriend recently said, "Hey, we bought all that fishing stuff last year and got you a fishing license. When are we going to go?" Man, she's one of the 3 people I've actually told. I've only told my mother, her, and one other person. I told you. In fact, up until today, Vic, I've actually now told 4 people, including you. So up until today, you were the 3rd person. And today I told my daughter. She's still pretty little. She's only 10, but I told her I was going to be on a radio show. And I hadn't decided yet if I wanted her to listen to it or not. I told her a very, very brief, not very descriptive, not very emotional story. I just said, "Yeah, Daddy saw something in the woods once that really scared him. That's why I don't like to go in the woods. And a really nice man who has a really good show about it is going to call me tonight, and we're going to talk about it." So I probably won't let her listen to the show now I think about it. But 4 people in 7 years.
You said your daughter's only 10, but how did she react to that news?
My daughter's still at that age where they look at you like you're a superhero. And I didn't want her to necessarily be afraid. I don't want her to have the fear that I have, but at the same time, she knows that I know about these things from researching it and such, because I am so protective of her when she goes up to camp. I drill it into her that when you go anywhere, you go with a partner. You never go alone. I don't care if it's to go to the bathroom and it's only 20 feet away, and you go with someone. I don't know if you're familiar with the story of Garrett Bardsley. Garrett is a young boy, I believe he was 12 years old, who was out in the Uintas with his dad and the Boy Scout troop that he was a member of. Him and his dad were fishing, and he stepped into the water by mistake, and he told his dad, "Hey, I'm going to go and change my socks and shoes, and I'll be back." And he headed over to the campsite, which from what I've been told and what I've read, wasn't very far. Probably very similar to the YMCA setup that I described that my daughter goes to. And he disappeared, and all they found was a sock. And they've never found anything else. And so my son and my daughter, my son's real little, he's only 6, so he doesn't listen to me as much, so he doesn't get to go to camp. Not after what his dad has experienced. But my daughter, and trust me, it's the worst week of the year, Vic. When she goes to camp, it is the worst week of the year for me because I freak out the whole week. Last year, my girlfriend was like, "You really got to chill out." I'm like, I can't chill out. I can't. I saw something that was about 8-9 feet tall, had the head of a golf cart. I mean, this thing was gigantic, and now I've done the research, and I've heard other people's stories, and I've heard about how these things can move and how easily they're able to surround people, get in front of people, get behind people, do whatever they want. I mean, this is their realm. You know, if you put on top of that, if you do some of the research and you even hear some of the Bigfoot stories, those can be just as scary. You know, anybody who says that they want to go out and go flower picking with one of these things, I think is crazy. Because I think just like any other being in the known universe, some are going to be worse than others. I have never heard a Dogman story that sounded very pleasant. I've never heard anybody say, yeah, and then like we left some bread out and the Dogman left us a shiny rock. I've never heard of that. You hear that with the Bigfoot, people talking about Bigfoot and all that. And again, my logic, for a long time, I kind of giggled at this kind of stuff. But when something happens to you, it sure changes your mindset. You stop giggling and you start listening very closely to what people say. You start picking up on the things that are similar to what you saw, similar to what you experienced, things that you can say, hey, yeah, that's right, I felt that. That's it. That was the feeling that I had. Obviously, not everybody's going to have the same reaction. Not everybody's going to have the same. Not everything's going to happen the same to each person. I look at thrill people who jump off mountains and almost die and then parachute down to the bottom. And those people obviously are going to probably react different than I would. Some of the military people who've been in high-stress situations probably going to react different to those of us who have not been in those high-stress situations. But the one thing that seems to be universal is that it profoundly changes people when you see one of these creatures. And it took years for me to figure out what it was. For the first several years, 3-4 years, I didn't even think about it. I didn't go in the woods. I didn't go fishing. I stopped. That part of my life was over. It just was done. And I wasn't about to tell anybody. I was, I thought maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I'm nuts. I'm not going to tell anybody. There's no way. No one's going to believe me. Even my mom. It took me years to tell my mother. My girlfriend, it took me several years to tell her. It takes took a lot of trust to say to somebody, hey, look, I had this experience and I saw something. And I don't know what it was. But I know it was there and it was real. And it moved in a way that it was either the biggest man with the biggest head ever with pointy ears. And that's probably the only thing that I had that I could think about, and I've thought very hard about this, was I can remember the ears. It's the only thing solid that I've got. That and the tracks. And the tracks, gosh, I wish I had a picture. Vic, I'll tell you what, the picture, it's not to show the world. I don't care about the world. It would be for me, so that I could compare it. So I found some photos online, actually through your Facebook group. I found some photos that were exactly what I had seen. In fact, they were so exactly what I had seen that it was muddy, and it had stepped in, and what had happened was two of the toes, or whatever you call them, the paws, they had actually sort of almost melded together. So it looked like instead of having 4 paws, it was 3. That was exactly what I saw. One of the people on your Facebook group had a picture, and I remember seeing it and going, that's what I saw. I'm pretty sure it was either on your group or through your group, somebody in there. And I found those pictures and I went, wow, that's what I saw. And it makes you feel good because, then you don't feel like I'm not crazy. I really did see it. My brother won't talk about it. Never has, never will, I don't think. I'm almost sure he saw something. And I don't think he knew how to deal with it. And this guy plays video games most of his life. So, to suddenly be face-to-face with something like that, I don't even think. Although I felt kind of bad, he didn't say, hey, man, let's get out of here. He just sort of ran and left me there. But through the research, you look and you look, it's those paws. The paw prints is really all I have. As I researched and tried to find out, what is this? What could it have been? Is it Bigfoot? Bigfoots don't have claws. It took years. And last year, I heard, it was through one of the Bigfoot shows, one of the podcasts, somebody mentioned a Dogman. And I had heard rumblings of a Michigan Dogman at some point, but to be honest, I figured it was folklore, something, just whatever. I didn't believe it was real. I started looking into it more and more, and I found your podcast. I want to say this was last summer. And that's when for the first time as I started to look into your stuff and listen to the accounts on your show. And there was one in particular where a young woman tells her story about her and her friend and how they had taken a trip down to buy something from some gypsies. And she talks about on the way back being chased down by one of these things. And you could hear in her voice, she had a very startling, very serious experience. And she quivered. I quivered with her. I remembered that feeling, that it was like in your gut. You know, they say flight or fight. If I had been 10 feet from this thing, there would have been nothing. I would have just looked to the ground. I don't know what I would have done. What am I going to do? You can't run that thing. But it took me many years to figure out to even come to some sort of, what could this be? Obviously, I wish I had definitive proof. And again, I think for a lot of people, it's just the only reason why I'd ever want to see one, and from about 1.5 miles to 2 miles away, wouldn't be for anything other than just to verify, yep, that's it. That's the shadow. That's the thing in the woods. That's what I saw that day. I'm not crazy. There it is. And some of the art that people draw greatly resembles that shadow I saw that day. And I didn't sleep a lot when I first found your podcast. I had a lot of sleepless nights, and I remember laughing one night because at first what I decided to do, because the kids, I would wait till they go to bed, and then I'd lay there and listen to your podcast, and then I realized I was like a little kid again. I couldn't sleep with the lights off. I had to have the lights on. I felt like a little kid again as I was listening and remembering. It took a long time. Even now, though, and I started having nightmares after you and I spoke, and I told the story in detail, really, for the first time. And I thought about it a lot, obviously. Every time my daughter goes to YMCA camp, I freak out. And they laugh at me. The kids laugh at me, but they know deep down I'm serious. They know I'm like, you guys, seriously, you always have someone with you. You just never. And I just think of that Garrett Bardsley boy. That boy, what happened to him? Because here's the thing. If a mountain lion takes you, there's going to be blood, there's going to be stuff, there's going to be ripped clothing, you're going to hear something, you hear the kids scream, even if it's a bear. There was a girl, I think in the UK or something, and a bear attacked her. She was able to actually call her mother on the phone. So it's not like they necessarily just kill you in one swoop. I believe bears start eating you while you're alive. So you have some time, so you're going to scream, you're going to freak out. And these people go missing, and sometimes you hear like grown men that go missing, and they don't find anything. And you have to wonder, like, what on earth is strong enough to take a man, a grown man, and all you might find, if anything, is a sock or a particle of clothing. You know, I know, like, when it's wintertime, they blame it on paradoxical undressing. I've done some research, and I can't find any instances of people who are climbing Mount Everest who froze to death and took their clothes off. So that would be a great place to find evidence that paradoxical undressing is really something that happens when people freeze to death. But, you know, then you hear this happened during the summer with Garrett Bardsley. There was a hunter, Tom Messick, I think the guy's name was. He was 82, Troy, New York. They were out hunting. So he's an older guy, 82. That was in November, I think. Guy went missing. Not a trace, just gone. It's crazy when you start looking into some of these stories. You know, these people just, nobody knows where they went. And that's why I think it's dangerous when people talk about, you know, be friends with the Bigfoot and go out there and go find the Dogman. Don't go find a Dogman. You don't ever want to see a Dogman. Unless you see one and you just want to know that you're not crazy. You don't want to see a Dogman. You don't want to go out there. You don't do that. I don't understand it. I don't understand why people want to go out there and approach these things, because it only takes one time for it to turn deadly. And then that's it.
Yeah, I never will understand why people do go out and seek out interactions with Dogman. It just doesn't make sense to me, but I guess to each their own. Here's the most important question of the night, Damien. After this interview, do you think you're going to be able to deal with that encounter you had better, or do you think it's going to make any difference at all?
After you and I spoke the first time, I started having some nightmares, some bad dreams. And it's calmed down, but for a few weeks there, it was pretty rough. I wish I knew. I think if I knew the answer to that question, if it were a positive thing, I would have done it a long time ago. If it was a negative thing, I probably wouldn't have come on and talked to you. I think it's always therapeutic for people to talk about things that have affected them negatively. I think it's important for people to get out emotion. I think it's important for people to face fears. I was in Manhattan on 9/11. That's probably the other scariest moment of my life. And the first thing I did, Vic, was the second that I could, I got on a plane and I flew out west. Why? Because I was scared. I was scared to get on a plane. I'm sure thousands of people were scared to get on airplanes. And I went on a JetBlue flight. I'll never forget it. The pilot came on and said, "Hey, I've got a big axe up here, so if anybody causes any problems, let me know. We'll use the axe." And everybody laughed, and it sort of broke the ice, and the flight out to L.A. was great. But I wasn't downtown. I was in Midtown. As we were running back uptown, I worked on 44th Street at the time, and not too far away, about 10 blocks away, was the Empire State Building. And, of course, that's what was running through our heads was, well, they hit the Twin Towers, so Empire State Building's next. And Broadway. I worked at a theater on Broadway, so I'm like, Broadway, Times Square. We were all freaking out. It was a really scary moment. And obviously that changed our country. That changed the world. I will tell you that my encounter in the woods in Utah changed me just as profoundly. And it was really difficult because I couldn't talk to anybody about it. I could talk to my friends about 9/11. I could talk to my family about 9/11. And for a while it was difficult, and I didn't necessarily want to talk about it because it made me angry. But as you asked, will it make you feel better? It did. I felt a lot better expressing my outrage and my anger and my frustration and all the different feelings that our skyline was changed forever. But this was something where I couldn't explain it. How do you tell somebody, hey, so I was in the woods and I saw this gigantic beast of a thing and it scared me, and it was so intense that the crickets and the flies and all those insects stopped moving, and that's how scary it was. Most people are going to look at me and go, Damien, you need to get some rest and lie down for a few hours, and they're going to pat you on the back and send you on your way. They're not going to take you seriously. They're not going to listen to you, and I think that's why I didn't tell anybody for a long time. I told my mom. In fact, I started to tell her probably 2 or 3 times before I think I actually told her. My mom, she's spiritual in her way, and she believes in God, and she's religious. And I think for her that helps her. I think she thinks that there are things out there that she probably takes it more from a religious standpoint. I take this from I don't know what standpoint. I listen to people who say that a lot of the sightings happen near Indian burial grounds and stuff like that. I have no idea what to think of that. As I try to apply my way of thinking to what happened to me, it's hard sometimes because I'm a fact-driven person. I want to prove it was or it wasn't. I watched a TV show recently where a psychologist showed how people will look at an object and see a face. And I'm like, yeah, but you know what? I didn't see a face. I saw a being. I saw a body. I saw a huge body. I saw a shadow. I didn't see its face. I wish I'd seen its face. Because then I could say, yeah, that's what happened to me. I saw a face in the woods. I saw something move. It wasn't a tree. I haven't seen too many trees that walk around. So you're always looking for something. You're looking for something to either tell you you made it up in your head or you're right and it's real. And that's what's crazy about this whole subject. Bigfoot and then Dogman and all these creatures of the night and stuff, what's their purpose? What are they here for? But Vic, the one thing that I think when it comes down to it, though, is we have to look to our past. Because dogmen were revered thousands of years ago. As I've done some of my research, you look at the Egyptians, they revered dogmen. American Indians, there are drawings out there of dogmen, of Bigfoot. So these creatures legends, these myths, this lore has been there for a long, long, long time, all over the world. So what's their purpose? Why are they here? I don't know. I've heard all the different stories. Well, maybe they come from, I've heard aliens drop them here to watch us. I've heard they come through portals. I've heard that they're not really real, but they are real. It's all these things. And I saw something. It was physical. It was real. It was there. It moved. It didn't float. There was no smoke around it. It was a physical thing, just like I've seen animals in the forest before. It was there. And then I think a lot of the people that I listen to, that I truly believe, I think, I'm not saying there's not a supernatural tendency to this. What I would say is the paranormal is probably a better term, because all paranormal means is it's beyond what's normal. It's just not normal. These are paranormal. They are not normal. And they scare the out of me. I won't sleep tonight, Vic, but I'm hoping that, in time. And it's been nice. I've talked to one or two people after meeting you and talking to you, and some of the people who've also had some issues, had something they saw and had a hard time chatting about it.
If it does help you in any way doing this show, then that's what it's all about. That's really good news. One thing I want to clarify, though, is didn't you say earlier in the interview that you definitely did see canine-style ears on top of its head?
I did. That's probably the only definitive body, other than the head. The head was huge. I saw ears. And that's why I was like, you can't be a bear. I looked to see, are there any bears out there that have ears like that? Or that can bears' ears ever can become pointy like that? So if I had to explain the ear shape to you, I would say Doberman is probably the best ear shape I can tell you. Bigger than a Doberman pinscher, but that's the kind of ear shape I saw. And again, you have to remember, as I'm looking at it, so it had just gotten rain and it was, cloudy and dark, and as I was looking down, it was literally like an outline of shadows. It was the outline of this animal, and the ears were definitive. I could see the ears. In my dreams, I can see the snout and everything, but that's just my dreams. I could not make out the facial features, which is the one thing that I really, as scared as I was, I really wish I had seen that just to define it more for me. The experience, though, Vic, it doesn't matter. The fear that I felt was so intense that I have never felt that again. Pretend things don't shake us like that. They don't change you like that. Only real things change people like that. And sometimes I feel like I'm talking to myself, and I'm telling myself, like, it's okay. It's okay. It was real. You're not going nuts. And yeah, and I'm not. So I may go to the lake to try to take some photos for you, so you can see the lake. I was joking with my girlfriend. I said it's therapy, to go out there during the midday with probably an M16 and a sawed-off shotgun. And I mean, but you hear the stories that people shoot them with these high-powered rifles, and they still keep coming. How about that? Whoa, what is that all about?
Yeah, that is awfully strange. Yeah, some of the really strange stories like that are ones you haven't heard. I haven't shared them publicly, but they still make you scratch your head and say, what are we dealing with here? Well, I'll tell you what, we're about out of time. We're going to have to wrap this up, but I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing the details of that encounter with us. I really do appreciate it.
If I could just have one last thing just to reiterate to people, don't go looking for it. You don't want to. You think you do. When you find it, you'll realize you did not want to find what you found. You don't want to experience it. Ignorance is bliss. In this case, it really... I mean, on the other hand, though, I hope that through your show, people's lives are saved because they're aware that there's a possibility something's out there that's just beyond their abilities, their scope, and their reason. And that maybe people will, instead of going out alone, they'll bring a friend or two when they go hiking or camping or whatever it is they go doing, and maybe less people will go missing without a trace and stuff like that.
Those are all really good words. Well, thanks again so much for coming on, Damien. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks, Vic. I appreciate you, and have a great night.
You too. We'll talk to you later.
Take care.